Councilmember Cabello, Havrda.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the presentation, and of course everyone that each community member that spoke today. I do have a few quick questions, but I'm going to reserve them for the end and just talk a little bit about what I'd like to see this ARPA dollars, how I'd like to see them allocated. The spirit of ARPA is rescue and recovery, is resilience and recovery. Our community spoke, and we're funding based on those responses. The projects that receive funding must have a citywide impact, establishing the conditions where all San Antonio families and businesses can continue to grow and compete in the post-pandemic economy. A lot of the discussion here today is how much need is out there. One of the items I feel strongly about is Morgan's Wonderland. I happened to read an article this morning about the most fascinating facts in each state, and the author chose Morgan's Wonderland as the most fascinating thing about Texas. It's absolutely fascinating, but more than that, our city needs Morgan's Wonderland. I gotta tell you, I took great offense to folks today who say that this is just a roller coaster or an amusement park. It's much more than a roller coaster. Although our special needs community deserves to have fun and enjoy their lives just as much as anybody else. But fully funding Morgan's Wonderland is an investment to our entire community. Morgan's Wonderland's future plans include a multi-care center to help not only our special needs citizens, but also their families who need and deserve respite from the continual care their loved ones require. The facility will enhance Central and South Texas, South San Antonio's economic development. Caring for those with special needs for the most vulnerable is something I learned early on in my life, and it became a part of my professional life as a disability attorney. And so I see that same care and compassion in everyone associated with Morgan's Wonderland and wholeheartedly support it. Again, this is very, very much about recovery, about resilience, but also about compassion. In that same vein, I'm sure we'll all remember the long lines of people waiting for food distributions. This past November, Councilwoman Dr. Rosa Garcia and I hosted a Thanksgiving food distribution for our residents. We had hundreds of cars lined up waiting, and that is the case with every distribution the food bank hosts, in the beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, and now. San Antonio made national headlines for those long lines, and so I'd like to see that I very strongly support providing the $5.5 million to the food bank so they can continue the work that's greatly needed throughout the city. We also have to look at the work that Texas Biomed has done during the pandemic to help people return to normalcy via COVID-19 vaccines and antibody research. As chair of our Public Safety Committee, I look forward to participating in the discussion on the full $26 million for mental health funding. We have to remember, those of you today who are saying that we should reduce the amount, this wasn't our call. This was the community crying out. And after the pandemic started, if you'll recall, as chair of public safety, we had listening sessions, hours and hours of people talking and speaking to us about what they want to see in our public safety in our city. And mental health was top. Every single person mentioned, every single group mentioned mental health. So reducing that amount is going against the needs of our community and the cries of our community. I want to also continue to find ways to help our citizens receive proper mental health care and also supporting our officers with their mental health. We'll take a close look in our committee, Public Safety Committee, at alternatives to first responders when helping with people experiencing a mental health crisis and their families. We'll consider the role of trauma-informed care in our response to the houseless, including our foster care youth, who many times are houseless and worse. Unfortunately, it's a pipeline to sex trafficking as well. We will consider specially trained crisis intervention teams rather than armed police as a response to substance abuse and domestic violence. This puts mental health at the center of the public safety discussions. It's also an opportunity to hear creative and innovative ideas for helping our San Antonians suffering from mental health disorders. These designated ARPA funds will help us recover some of the ground lost to the pandemic, will help us restore our work toward establishing community policing practices, and will help rebuild the momentum we'd gained before the pandemic. The funds will go to specific projects that will help us to recover, to rebuild, and to restore our community safety in a renewed way. So, Mayor, I'm excited to get to work. Just a couple of questions, and actually it's regarding, I think, not to be too repetitive, but about premium pay. Did I hear you say, Eric, that when is the earliest that funds can be distributed? To our
Sorry,
city
Councilman, I
employees.
had to walk back to my seat. So
The earliest, my estimation would be at the beginning of summer, midsummer, would be the earliest. Part of that is to coordinate with the EMC, have those conversations, make sure that we incorporate that in the employee focus group conversations that we're having right now anyway. And more importantly, wait for the second installment of ARPA from the federal government. So assuming that stays on track and we get that in May, our recommendation is that we do that as part of the summer budget. I suspect the Councilwoman Villagran just made this point also about sooner is better. It can't be any sooner than June, though, because we've got to do the work and we've got to have the money.
Okay. So I guess we'll check back in June. But are the city employees going to receive a direct distribution in the form of a check or a direct deposit?
Well, that's the question. I mean, that was part of the presentation last week. I mean, I've spent a fair amount of time, several of us have spent a fair amount of time talking to employees. What I want to hear from the employees is whether or not they want to see a direct allocation potentially in terms of a one-time payment for premium and hazard pay type situation. I've heard from employees about contributions to health savings accounts and flexible savings accounts. I've heard from employees about possibly adding or changing a health benefit or lowering our employee premium for the next couple of years. So I've heard a bunch of different things. That's frankly why I've made the recommendation last week that we formalize that, get some direct feedback from a number of employee groups, because we have all kinds of employees. My underlying foundational recommendation is that we treat all employees as closely as possible the same. I don't want to distinguish between anybody because we have enough. Sometimes there's differences between uniforms and civilians. They're already on different health benefit plans. There are some natural distinctions, but I think everybody has worked tirelessly over the last 2 years, and I want to make sure that we include everybody in that conversation.
Thank you. And of course, I'll defer to city employees what they're looking for. But in the spirit of ARPA dollars, I think that if you were able to give them a direct distribution, it's so that they can, climb out of the pandemic hole, as it were. Right. I think that probably a direct allocation would be most helpful in the at least in the short term. And with that, I look forward to supporting this item. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cabello Havrda. Councilmember McKee Rodriguez.